Hi, I'm Raylene. I used to think family meant protection, loyalty, at the very least, fairness. But then my own mother looked me in the eye and said I ruined her life. She kicked me out of the house I paid for after I cleared her debts, covered her bills, and stayed when no one else did. On moving day, I smiled, but not for the reason you might think. They forged my name, stole my home, erased me from every picture, and still acted like I owed them more. How did it come to this? How do you fight back when the people hurting you are the ones who raised you? And what do you do when silence isn't safety, but strategy? Let me tell you what really happened. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my back felt like it had caved in. I'd done a double shift. Again. The front yard was scattered with brittle leaves, the wind brushing them across the porch in lazy circles. My keys jingled faintly in my hand as I pushed open the front door, balancing a bag of groceries against my hip. No one came to greet me. I could hear laughter, hers. My mother hadn't laughed like that in years, not even after Dad's funeral. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. There they were, Tom and Myra, feet propped on the coffee table like it was theirs. Myra held a glass of wine, pinky slightly raised, like she was playing some version of Suburban Queen. My brother didn't even glance up from his phone. Velda didn't look my way. She smiled at Myra and said, "If I never had her, my life would have turned out so much better." She said it so casually, it almost didn't land. Almost. I stood there, in my scrubs, shoes still damp from the parking lot at the hospital. The grocery bag slipped slightly in my grip. No one moved to help. I turned, walked to the fridge, and quietly put the milk away. "Dinner's in an hour," Velda added, like I was the help. I said nothing, just nodded. Later that night, I noticed the hallway shelf was empty. My picture frames gone. The vase I bought from that fall festival last year, replaced by a plastic centerpiece that looked like it belonged in a cheap motel. I followed the quiet shift in energy as I made my way into the living room. Tom's old college photo was framed and centered above the fireplace. His shoes, worn but polished, sat near the entry bench, where Dad used to leave his. Myra's scarf was draped over the back of the couch. The entire room smelled like her hairspray. "Did something change?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. Tom looked up with a half smirk. "It's Mom's house, isn't it? We're family." Velda chimed in without missing a beat. "They'll be staying indefinitely. I need their support now." I almost laughed. Support? Like I hadn't been covering the mortgage for over a year. Like I hadn't just paid off her overdue medical bills while skipping vacations and eating microwave dinners on my night shifts. Instead, I sat down across from them. There wasn't even a chair left in the room that hadn't been moved to face Tom. I crossed my legs and looked at the floor. Dinner came and went like a scripted play. Tom was served first. His plate full, still steaming. Mine was handed to me after everyone else, the roast barely warm. I ate quietly while Myra talked about painting the walls, a cleaner white, and adding a more modern touch to the kitchen. No one asked about the hospital, about the case I'd stayed overtime to handle, about the patient who didn't make it. At one point, Velda looked over at Myra and said, "I feel so relaxed with you here. You're like the daughter I always wanted." The fork paused midair in my hand. I swallowed hard. Not food, just silence. I excused myself after I cleared the plates, though no one seemed to notice I was gone. Upstairs, the air was colder somehow. Maybe it was the draft from the old window, maybe something deeper. I changed into an oversized t-shirt and sat on the edge of my bed, still in the same socks from my shift. I could hear them laughing downstairs. Louder this time. My mother's voice rose above the others, sharp and free. "If I were gone tomorrow," I whispered to the quiet room, "would they even notice?" My phone buzzed beside me, a bank alert. Something about a charge I didn't remember making. I stared at the screen, then turned it face down. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. I stayed in bed a few minutes longer than usual, Not because I was tired, but because something kept gnawing at me. The bank alert from the night before hadn't left my mind. I hadn't touched my savings account in weeks, yet there it was, blinking like a warning light. By the time I got dressed and made my way downstairs, Velda was already in the kitchen, stirring her coffee like she had no idea she'd spent the last dinner reminding me I didn't belong. She didn't glance my way when I entered. Just took a slow sip, eyes fixed out the window. "Morning," I said, opening the fridge and pretending not to care. She replied, the kind of sound people make when they can't be bothered with words. I took my phone and sat at the table, pretending to scroll through the news. But instead, I logged into my online banking account. The screen loaded slowly, like it too was hesitant to show me what I already suspected. And then, I saw it. A personal loan opened in my name. $30,000. I blinked, checked again. It listed our home address. The borrower, me. But I hadn't applied for anything, not even a credit card in the past year. I clicked through the details, my hand tightening around the phone. The disbursement date? 4 months ago. Around the same time, Velda's car was suddenly repaired, and Tom got that new laptop. I remembered her saying it was some family help. I looked up from the screen and watched her slice an orange like nothing in the world was wrong. "Mom," I said carefully. "Did you need a loan a few months back? Maybe under my name?" She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just said, "I don't recall anything like that." "Why would I do that, honey?" I nodded, like that was an answer. Then I got up, walked out, and closed the door softly behind me. I spent the next couple hours tearing through drawers, looking for paperwork. My passport, which I kept in a side drawer for emergencies, was gone. The folder with my lease agreement and a few personal contracts I'd stored years ago, also missing. I checked the hallway closet, one I'd used to keep spare blankets, winter boots, a box of keepsakes from college. But the shelves were bare, except for a few dusty puzzles. My storage bin? Gone. Instead, I found a cardboard box labeled in thick black Sharpie, MISC. I opened it to find my things, trophies from high school debate, my employee badge from my first nursing job, a letter from Dad folded neatly in its original envelope. Everything shoved in carelessly, like junk in a garage sale. I stared at the box for a long time. Then I picked it up and carried it back into my room. That evening, Myra passed by in the hallway with a roll of wallpaper samples in her hand. She didn't even acknowledge me. Inside the bedroom, my bedroom, though it didn't feel like mine anymore, I printed every page from the bank's loan portal. I compared the signatures line by line. It was nearly perfect. Same slant, same loop on the Y in my name. But it wasn't mine, and I knew it. I pulled out a magnifying glass, something I hadn't touched in years, a gift from Dad when I said I wanted to be a detective. The ink pressure was inconsistent. The signature had been traced, then copied. Scrolling further, I saw the witness signature, Myra K. Hastings. Of course. I didn't slam anything. Didn't yell. I placed the pages into a manila envelope, sealed it, and wrote in neat letters across the front, "For later." Just then, I heard Myra laughing downstairs. Through the thin walls, her voice carried clearly. "No, seriously," she was saying to someone on the phone. "We'll redo the whole living room once she's gone. I already picked out the sectional. It's so much brighter than what we have now. Her stuff just makes everything look sad." I didn't feel sad. I felt awake. I set the envelope beside my handbag and turned on my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I typed, Jolisa Reed, civil litigation attorney, a name I hadn't thought about in years. We'd gone to school together. She specialized in financial and familial fraud now. I remembered that from a LinkedIn post someone had shared. I bookmarked the site, closed the tab. That night at dinner, I didn't speak. When Tom asked if I'd had a productive little day, I smiled and said, "Absolutely." When Myra leaned over and asked if I was feeling okay, I nodded. Never better. Back upstairs, I moved the envelope from my bag to the top drawer of my nightstand. Then I turned off the light and laid down without changing clothes. They think I'm too quiet to notice, that I'm too tired to fight. They erased me from the house, but they forgot one thing. I see everything. By the time Saturday rolled around, I already knew better than to expect fairness. Velda had invited some extended family over for dinner, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Just a small gathering, she'd said, like I was the caterer and not her daughter. I spent the better part of the afternoon in the kitchen, roasted 2 chickens, baked sweet potato casseroles, steamed greens, even pulled together a lemon chess pie from scratch. Tom walked by twice and didn't say a word. Myra hovered behind me with a glass of white wine, giving feedback as if I worked for her. Maybe go easier on the pepper next time, she muttered, sniffing a spoonful. Not everyone likes it spicy. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That wasn't the point. At 6, the guests arrived. Velda had rearranged the dining table so Tom could sit at the head. She placed herself to his right, Myra to his left. I was placed at the far end, where the light from the ceiling fixture barely reached. Dinner began. Velda served Tom first, piling his plate like he hadn't eaten in days. The guests came next. Smiles, laughter, a toast. Then Myra. My plate came last. By then, the chicken was already losing its warmth, and the gravy had settled into a lukewarm puddle. A cousin, Aunt Marie's daughter, I think, leaned over, asked sweetly, "And what do you do, dear?" Before I could speak, Velda answered for me. "Oh, she just works at a desk. Nothing worth mentioning." The cousin nodded politely, already looking away. I took a bite of my food. It tasted like cardboard. My stomach tightened, not from hunger. The conversation buzzed around me. Tom bragged about a new job lead, which I was pretty sure was just a recruiter's email. Myra chimed in about her plans to repaint the kitchen. "I want a coastal feel," she said, placing her wineglass down gently. "That soft blue-gray, maybe some new cabinets. You know, a fresher look." Velda nodded. "Oh, definitely. It's time this house reflected a new energy." I wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin and said, steady and calm, "Maybe we should talk about how we're splitting expenses. You know, food, utilities, even just a third." The room fell quiet. Then Velda picked up her glass, slammed it against the coaster hard enough to startle a few people. "You're still here for free, and you want to split bills?" she snapped. "You live off me. You always have." I let the words hang in the air, didn't rush to defend myself. Nobody said a word, not even the cousins. One of them took another sip of their wine and looked down at their plate. I nodded slowly, then stood up. "Excuse me," I said, pushing my chair back quietly. "I forgot I have a few things to finish." I didn't go far, just stepped out onto the back porch, letting the cold evening air cool my face. My hands were clenched in my jacket pockets. I didn't cry. I was far beyond that stage. I just stared out at the backyard, remembering all the times I'd raked those leaves for her, thinking I was being helpful. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the dishes had been cleared, I sat in my room with my laptop open. The screen glowed softly in the dark. I opened my bank account. There it was, a $728 charge from a furniture store. I hadn't made that purchase. I clicked through the transaction details. Delivery address, our house. Buyer, Myra Hastings. The receipt included a "thanks for your purchase" message and a picture of a coffee table. I knew that table. It had arrived last week. She said it was a gift from her parents. I walked downstairs, found her in the living room, watching a true crime documentary like nothing had happened. "Myra," I said, holding up my phone, "did you use my account for this?" She looked over at me, casual as ever. "Velda said it's all part of the household. Don't be petty." "Petty?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She shrugged. "It's just furniture. We all live here, don't we?" Velda stepped in from the hallway like she'd been waiting for her cue. If you want to stay here, stop complaining. This is my house. You don't get to control everything. I looked at her, at both of them. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. Instead, I turned and walked back upstairs. In my room, I sat at my desk and opened a draft email I'd written weeks ago, one I hadn't been brave enough to send. The subject line read, "Resignation, effective immediately." I stared at it for a long time, then hit delete. They weren't going to push me out of my work the way they tried to erase me from this house. Instead, I opened a new document. Title: Documentation Log. Property, financial, verbal abuse. I began typing. Entry 1. They used my name, my money, my silence. I saved the file and backed it up to a flash drive. I wasn't going anywhere. They wanted silence. I gave them a record instead. I didn't sleep much after that. My body lay still, but my mind had found a rhythm of its own. Quiet, methodical. I spent the next few days keeping everything surface level. I made coffee. I smiled during dinner. I nodded when Velda told me to pick up more detergent. But underneath, I was collecting pieces. Watching, listening. Late one evening, after cleaning up the kitchen and making sure no one was hovering nearby, I went into the hallway closet where we kept old files in a locked cabinet. Dad had insisted on fireproof containers, said, "Paper tells the truth better than people." The key still worked. I pulled out a folder labeled Insurance and Property, thick with yellowing pages and clipped receipts. Flipping through it, a document caught my eye. Property Transfer Authorization, notarized. I sat down on the floor and scanned it twice. The page looked official, signed, and stamped by someone I'd never met. But my name was on the transfer line. The house had been legally signed over to Velda. And the date? The day it was notarized, I had worked a 12-hour double at the hospital. There was no way I had signed this. I took a deep breath, then grabbed the folder and carried it back to my room, locking the door behind me. I laid it out under the lamp, alongside my employee schedule from that week. Side by side, the contradictions stared back at me. I remembered Velda handing me a stack of insurance renewal forms that same week, pages I signed without question. She'd slipped it in, and I never saw it coming. A couple nights later, Velda hosted another dinner for family. I kept my tone even, my plate full. The relatives were the same tired group who only showed up for a free meal or to get in good graces with whoever paid the bills. Tom held court like he always did, arms wide, voice louder than necessary. "Honestly, if I hadn't stepped in," he announced between bites of roast, "this house would have fallen apart years ago." I looked at him without blinking. He continued, "I've been helping Mom with the mortgage, covered a few foundation fixes last summer, got the pipes sorted out too." "You remember that water bill spike?" Myra chimed in. "And don't forget the back porch repairs." Velda sat next to him, silent. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. Just let it land. Aunt Trudy leaned toward me and whispered, "Wow, I didn't realize Tom was carrying that much. You must be grateful." I wanted to say, "I've paid every utility for 2 years." But I didn't. I smiled instead and offered her more gravy. Later that night, I returned to my room and opened a box I hadn't touched since Dad passed. Inside were receipts, statements, and the original closing documents for the house. Every canceled check I'd used to cover the mortgage after Dad died. Line after line in black ink. My handwriting, my money, my name. I lined them up on the bed next to Tom's proof, which was nothing more than vague repair quotes and a handful of Venmo screenshots showing payments to himself. The timelines didn't match. The numbers didn't add up. I printed everything and created folders, each labeled clearly. Utilities, 2021. Mortgage transfers, bank correspondence. By the time I was done, the paperwork filled an entire tote bag. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started a new document. Title: Affidavit, Property Ownership Dispute. Beneath it, I began writing what I knew: dates, dollar amounts, names. This time, I included 2 witnesses who had helped me file the original paperwork, a retired nurse from the hospital, and one of Dad's old friends from church. Both had nothing to gain. Both would tell the truth. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the principal. The next morning at breakfast, Tom strolled in like a sitcom character, hair still damp from his shower, sipping coffee from a mug that said, "Best son ever." He looked at Velda and grinned. "Maybe one day I'll actually put my name on the deed, right, Mom?" She chuckled, the way people do when they think the punchline's innocent. "Maybe you earned it." I finished my toast, placed my napkin on the table, and said, "Maybe I'll show you who really owns it." Tom laughed like I'd told a joke. Velda's smile faltered for just a second. I got up without another word and walked to my room. Closing the door behind me, I opened my laptop, clicked confirm, and scheduled a notary appointment. They'd signed their parts. Now it was my turn. Chapter 5. 4253. The snow had started earlier than expected that Thursday evening. I came home through the back entrance, brushing flakes from my coat, hoping the cold would quiet my thoughts. For once, I wasn't late. I'd swapped shifts with a colleague just to make it home before dinner. Not for their sake, but because something inside me said I needed to be here. As I passed the laundry room, I heard voices, low, unguarded. I paused, hand still on the doorknob. "She's not going to last much longer," Tom's voice echoed through the hallway. "Once she's gone, everything resets. I'll move the paperwork next week." Velda's response came after a sip of something. "Good, and I'll finally make a proper will, with the right child on it this time." I stood still, heart pounding not from surprise, but from the confirmation of what I already suspected. I slid my phone from my coat pocket, tapped record, and caught the last 20 seconds of their conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I backed away quietly and slipped into the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd made every Thanksgiving dish for the last 7 years. The same counter they now used for their wine glasses and gossip. Later, in my bedroom, I played the recording back, letting it loop while I changed into an old sweatshirt. Their words didn't sting. They validated everything. I listened once more, then opened my laptop and searched for a name I hadn't thought about since college: Jolisa Reed. She was always sharp, even back then. She didn't speak unless she had something that cut. I found her firm's website easily enough. Family law, financial abuse, property disputes, exactly the kind of battles I now found myself forced into. I typed a short message. "Still want to be my lawyer?" I hit send and didn't expect anything for a day or two. She called within 10 minutes. "Been waiting for you to ask," Jolisa said, her voice just as direct as I remembered. "You should have reached out months ago." "I wasn't ready." "No one ever is. Let's start with the property transfer. I'll need copies. If that signature isn't yours, and they filed it as legal, we've got leverage." "They did." "And Raylene," she added, her tone shifting. "If they lied on anything else, they're in for more than just embarrassment." I exhaled, nodding even though she couldn't see me. That night, I pulled out every folder, every printed receipt, every copy of the bills I'd paid in my name. I laid them across the bed like puzzle pieces waiting to be fit together. There were scanned lease agreements from 2020, bank logs detailing every transfer I'd made since Dad passed, and emails with Velda confirming payment amounts. Halfway through the stack, I came across a message from my father. It was short, buried in an old email thread from the month before he died. "If anything happens to me, make sure you keep the house safe. It's yours." I stared at the words, my hand trembling just slightly. I printed it out and slipped it into the emotional manipulation folder. By the time I was done organizing, I'd created 3 distinct categories: fraud, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation. I took photos of each page, backed everything up onto a USB, then placed it in a small lockbox. An hour later, I received an email from Jolisa. "Schedule a notary. This gets real now. I replied with 3 words. Already did. Monday. The house was quiet when I finally stepped into the kitchen to grab something to eat. The roast from earlier was cold, but I didn't mind. I sat at the table alone, slowly cutting into the meat, listening to the faint sounds upstairs. Velda's laughter filtered through the ceiling vents. High, familiar, the kind of laugh that used to mean safety when I was small. Now it was just noise. I thought about the sound of her voice that morning when she said Tom had earned the deed. I thought about how many times she'd turned her back on the truth just to make her story sound cleaner. Let them laugh. Let them plan. They thought they were winning. But while they were making toasts and rewriting history, I was building a case, one document at a time. I whispered to no one. They drew the line. I just chose which side of it I'm standing on. Saturday afternoon settled in like a quiet warning. The snow from the night before had hardened along the window panes, catching just enough sunlight to blur the living room in pale reflection. I waited until the kitchen was empty. Velda and Myra had gone out to buy a few things for the new guest room, as they called it, and then slipped into the hallway closet with my keys in hand. The fireproof cabinet hadn't been touched in years. It still had the scent of old cardboard and dried glue. I opened it slowly, careful not to disturb the dust, and pulled out the folders one by one. Most were labeled in Velda's handwriting: car, health, utilities. But near the back, under a stack of tax returns, I found it. A tab marked property transfer. My chest tightened. I sat cross-legged on the hallway carpet and opened the folder under the weak light. It was a notarized deed transfer form, moving ownership of the house from me to Velda. Dated, stamped, signed, and there, scribbled near the bottom in near-perfect cursive, was my name. Except I hadn't signed it. The date on the document matched a hospital double I had pulled during the height of flu season. I remembered coming home barely conscious, collapsing into bed in my scrubs, still wearing my badge. That night, Velda had handed me a few forms to review. Insurance renewals, she'd said. She had slipped it in, hidden it in plain sight. The signature was close enough to pass, but not mine. I scanned it twice more, then snapped a photo and placed the document inside my folder labeled fraud. No panic, just precision. The next morning over breakfast, I waited for an opening. Velda was spreading jelly on toast, Myra was reading a home decor magazine, and Tom had his earbuds in, nodding to music none of us could hear. "Mom," I said calmly, "we need to talk about the deed transfer." Velda paused just for a second. "What are you talking about, honey?" "The document I found yesterday, transferring the house to you, my signature's on it, but I didn't sign it." Her eyes narrowed, then softened too quickly. "You've been under a lot of pressure. That stress, it can affect memory." Myra looked up without lifting her head. "Is she going off again?" Velda patted my hand like I was a child trying to remember a dream. "Maybe take a few days off work, get some rest. You're always so tense lately." I pulled my hand back. "I'm fine. What I'm not is confused." They said nothing. I cleared my plate and walked away. That afternoon, I went into the garage to look through one of Dad's old tool drawers. I was hoping for nothing in particular, until I saw the curtain rod above the bench. It had always been slightly off-kilter, bent on one side. Out of instinct more than logic, I climbed up and checked behind it. Wedged between the rod and the wooden wall brace was a slim envelope, aged and yellowing, sealed with a piece of tape barely holding. On the front, in Dad's handwriting, were 5 words: "To be opened by Raylene only." I climbed down slowly and peeled it open at my desk. Inside was a single page, his will. It was straightforward. The house, its assets, and all contents were to go to me. There was a clause explicitly stating that if anyone contested the will, their claim would be voided. The witness signature? Jolisa's father, a man I remembered from Sunday church picnics, solid, honest, now gone. I took a photo of every inch of the document, then placed it in a fresh folder labeled Primary Source. Sunday morning, I brought it to the table and laid it between the butter dish and the coffee pot. "What's this?" Tom asked, half laughing. "The truth," I replied, sliding the paper toward Velda. Her face paled. Myra leaned over to read, then looked up with her eyebrows high, expression unreadable. Velda finally spoke. "This is old, irrelevant." He changed his mind. "You mean you hid it?" I said. "Not anymore." Tom tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Ray. What's the point of digging up old stuff? Let's just move forward." "We are," I said, "but on record." Velda snatched the paper off the table and stood. "This isn't how family handles things." "No," I said, pushing my chair back, "but it's how people handle theft." I walked upstairs, closing the door softly behind me. I scanned the will into my laptop, converted it to PDF, and sent it to Yolisa. The subject line, Primary Leverage Secured. I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out the flash drive. Across the front, I'd written in permanent marker, all of it. The clock on my nightstand read 10:47 a.m. I set the alarm for 6:30 the next morning, because tomorrow the files wouldn't just sit in my desk drawer anymore. Tomorrow they'd be filed with the court. The filing went through that Monday morning. Jolisa confirmed it with a one-line email. "It's done." I didn't dance or cry or throw fists in the air. I just stood in my kitchen, staring at the coffee machine, watching the light blink in rhythm with my breath. It had taken weeks of preparation, years of silence, and less than an hour in front of a clerk to pull the rug out from under them. By the following Sunday, Velda decided it was time for a family lunch. Her tone on the note she slid under my door was syrupy. "Let's talk things through, just us." The way someone smiles while hiding a knife behind their back. Snow had crusted over the sidewalks again. Myra had set the table with cloth napkins and mismatched silverware that tried too hard to look intentional. Tom was dressed like he was about to give a TED Talk. Slacks, button-down, no socks. Velda wore pearls she hadn't touched since Dad's funeral. The food was forgettable. Soggy green beans. A roast that needed 10 more minutes in the oven. But none of that mattered. My appetite had checked out weeks ago. Midway through the meal, Myra took a photo of the table and posted it to social media. I watched her phone as she typed the caption, "Family means love." The image appeared online seconds later. Velda, Tom, Myra, a few of Velda's cousins, all smiling. I wasn't in it. They hadn't asked me to scoot closer or to smile. They'd simply angled the shot to cut me out entirely. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my water glass and finished it slowly. The ice clinked at the bottom as I set it down. Velda launched into small talk, pretending to reminisce about the good old days, how she missed real conversations around the table. Tom leaned in and said something about starting a podcast, and everyone chuckled like he was clever. I looked around at the people in that room, people who used to braid my hair, kiss my forehead, pass me mashed potatoes, and realized none of them saw me anymore. They only saw what I wasn't. Not Tom, not agreeable, not manipulatable. After lunch, I retreated to my room and waited for evening to fall. The email came just after 7 p.m. Confirmation of transfer. Executed. Your property has been legally sold to firm name withheld. Jolisa had handled it all. Quiet, clean, legal. The house was no longer under Velda's name. It wasn't under mine either. I'd sold it to a third-party real estate buyer Jolisa helped identify. A firm with no personal ties, no emotions, no guilt. Just paperwork. The forged deed Velda had used to steal the house back from me? Nullified. A clause in the sale ensured the property would be vacated in 10 days for inspection. It was all above board, all binding, all final. I took a walk around the house that night. Not out of nostalgia, just to say goodbye properly. I touched the kitchen counter where I'd spilled cocoa as a kid. Glanced at the hallway wall where my third-grade spelling bee photo used to hang. Ran my fingers along the banister I used to slide down when no one was looking. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the table while everyone ate breakfast like nothing was happening. Halfway through his eggs, Tom looked up. "Why are you so quiet?" I wiped my mouth, placed my napkin beside my plate, and stood up. "I'd recommend you start packing," I said, sliding a thick envelope onto the table. Velda blinked. "Excuse me? You have less than 2 weeks. The buyers are scheduled for a walkthrough." Tom scoffed. "This again?" Myra's laugh was high-pitched, like a balloon slowly losing air. "Raylene, no one takes you seriously." Velda rolled her eyes. "You're not serious." I opened the envelope, revealing the signed sale contract. "I am, and the new owners don't want squatters." Silence, pure and clean. I didn't wait for questions or a rebuttal. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. That night, I sat at my desk and crossed off a date on my calendar. Day 10, formal eviction triggered. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I didn't move. Another knock, softer. "Raylene?" Velda's voice, worn and reaching. "Can we talk?" I stood but didn't open the door. "You wouldn't do this to your own family." I stared at the wall in front of me, eyes dry. "You did it first," I said, just loud enough for her to hear. There was a long pause. Then the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall. Monday morning arrived colder than expected. Sleet tapped lightly against the windshield as Holisa and I sat parked outside Milwaukee Civil Court, watching people rush in under hoods and umbrellas. I hadn't spoken much on the drive downtown. I didn't need to. Everything I wanted to say had already been written, stamped, and submitted. We walked into the building together, the hall echoing with clipped footsteps and polite murmurs. The courthouse smelled like polished linoleum and wet wool coats, sharp, clinical, indifferent. They were already seated in the mediation room. Tom had on a blazer he probably hadn't worn since Dad's funeral. His tie was crooked. Myra was absent, babysitting her niece, according to Velda. And Velda, she looked tired but still wore her pearls like armor. Holisa nodded to the clerk, introduced us, and pulled out the thick accordion folder she'd been carrying since sunrise. The mediator was neutral-faced, reading over the paperwork with dispassion. After confirming all parties, he turned to Holisa. "Your client may proceed." Holisa didn't hesitate. "We're submitting evidence of forged legal documents related to the property in question," she said. "This includes tampering with a notarized transfer, signing under false pretense, concealment of a valid will, and unauthorized use of financial accounts belonging to Ms. Raylene Holt." She placed several items on the table, color-coded tabs sticking out like small teeth. Velda folded her arms, but said nothing. The mediator flipped through the documents, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at Velda. "Mrs. Holt, do you deny the signature on the transfer form?" Velda opened her mouth, but her voice didn't follow right away. I don't recall the details. There were so many papers. Maybe she signed and forgot." I didn't move, didn't even blink. He turned the paper slightly toward Tom. "Mr. Holt, are you aware that the transfer form was submitted with your input?" Tom shifted in his seat, pulled at his collar. Mom said she had everything in order. I didn't sign anything myself." "You received funds through the account tied to the house," Jaleesa added. "Venmo transfers, 4 separate deposits." "Those were gifts," he muttered. "From your sister's account." He had no answer for that. The mediator looked at me. "Ms. Holt, you've remained quiet. May I ask, why are you pursuing this case now?" I met his eyes. "Because they used my silence as consent," I said evenly, "and I never said yes." The room stayed quiet longer than necessary. Then he nodded, marking something on his form. "We'll move to resolution." It didn't take long. The property was legally reversed to my name. The forged transfer deemed null. The sale to the real estate firm upheld. The court would update public record within 72 hours. Tom slumped like someone had pulled the air out of him. Velda, for the first time, looked directly at me. "This wasn't supposed to go this far," she said, voice almost cracking. I tilted my head slightly. "You made it legal when you forged my name." No more was said. No apologies, no promises. Outside, the cold slapped our faces. Jaleesa offered me her gloves, but I shook my head. "I'm fine." She smiled. "Feel lighter?" "Not yet," I said, "but cleaner." We walked to the car in silence. When we got in, I checked my phone. An email notification blinked at the top of the screen. Subject: Property transfer finalized. Message: Tenancy legally vacated. Premises available for full transfer. I replied with 2 words: clear to close. 3 weeks after the ruling, I stood in front of the window in my new place, a modest condo near the Milwaukee Riverwalk. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floors, catching on a potted aloe I hadn't yet remembered to water. Outside, winter had painted everything in soft gray. I watched the river for a while, then turned back toward my phone, which had just buzzed. A voicemail from Velda. I didn't listen to it immediately. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the play icon. Eventually, curiosity won over. "We didn't mean to hurt you," her voice said, brittle and shaking. "You're still my daughter." She paused, then added, "Tom and Myra are gone. We lost the lease. I don't have anywhere else to go." I didn't respond. I didn't save the message. Instead, I blocked the number and set the phone face down on the counter. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It felt deserved. Later that afternoon, I ran into someone familiar at the grocery store, a neighbor from our old street. She gave me that gentle, side-angled smile Midwest women use when they're about to share something uncomfortable. "Your mom," she said. "She's smaller these days. Quiet. I saw her at the pharmacy. She looked like she hadn't slept." I nodded. "Thanks for letting me know." And that was it. I didn't ask for more. Word had spread quickly. Tom had been fired a week after the ruling. Internal misconduct, someone said. Myra was living in a month-to-month rental near the freeway, barely visible through plastic-covered windows. Velda had relocated into a subsidized unit out on 35th Street. No furniture, no visitors. It's strange how quickly a house can forget its people. The new owners had already started renovations. A neighbor texted me a picture of the front porch being torn off. I didn't feel satisfaction, just closure. My own space was quiet, not just in sound, but in weight. I'd brought very little with me: essentials, a few framed prints, one kitchen knife I'd always liked using. The only thing from the old house was a canvas I'd found tucked behind Dad's workbench. It had been torn in half, the corners browned, but I'd taken it to a local artist who specialized in kintsugi-style restoration. Now, the tier was sealed with gold leaf. In the photo, I stood alone. But the line, the break, shone. I hung it by the entryway. Jaleesa stopped by that Friday afternoon. She didn't knock hard, just enough to let me know she was there. "I figured you wouldn't ask, so I brought coffee anyway," she said, stepping in and shaking snow off her boots. We sat by the window in silence for a while. The world outside was still and crisp. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about the case. "Have you been sleeping better?" I nodded. "I'm not waking up angry anymore. That's something." She smiled and raised her paper cup. "That's a lot." We didn't talk about Velda, or Tom, or the mess. Just the weather, her dog's new habit of barking at the mailman, a Netflix series I hadn't watched yet. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't come with fanfare. It just existed, quietly, when you finally made enough space for it. The next morning, I packed a small box, addressed to Velda, no return label, no note. Inside, I placed a photocopy of the original will. Not the court-certified one, just a plain printout. And beneath that, the family photo from years ago. The one where I had been cropped out on social media, but originally stood between Dad and Velda, smiling in a dress I'd picked out myself. On the photo, I took a black pen and filled in my silhouette, until I was just a dark shape in the center of the group. Not erased, just blacked out. In the corner, near Velda's name, I wrote in small, neat ink, "You had the picture. I held the truth." I sealed the box and mailed it that same day. That night, I turned off my phone, unplugged the charger, and crawled into bed before 10. And for the first time in nearly a year, I slept through the night.